This is the BBC.
Hello, this is Krupa Party, and you're listening to the Woman's Hour podcast. The changing reality of our environment is something we are faced with on a daily basis, with new reports, new articles, new first-hand accounts of how climate change is impacting communities around the world. Just last week alone, we saw those wildfires in Canada leading to some of the worst pollution levels in cities like New York. And as smoke filled those skies, therapists there said that they saw a surge in the number of people with what is being called eco-anxiety. That is a chronic fear of environmental doom. A recent study by Bath University spoke to 10,000 young people across 25 countries. And what they found was that they were all worried about climate change, and more than 45% said their negative feelings around the issue impacted their daily lives. But it's not just young people who are feeling this. Psychiatrists in the British Medical Journal have labelled this feeling eco-anxiety, and although it's not yet considered a diagnosable condition, there is no doubt among experts of its negative impact. So we're going to explore this a bit more with the help of Jen Newall, is a climate scientist turned campaigner from the Climate Majority Project, who herself has struggled with her mental health due to the environment. You are now involved in the Climate Majority Project, which we'll hear about in a moment, but you were studying for a PhD in climate science. How did you get to that point?
Wow. Yeah. Hello. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this really important conversation. And my journey here is probably a book in itself, but getting into climate science, I've always been kind of fascinated, connected with, and local to kind of mountains and wild landscapes here in Scotland. And it's always been, something that I have felt passionately for and felt connected to. So it was quite a natural progression to feed my curiosity about the stories which the landscapes and the rocks hold and can teach us, in particular and around the climate crisis, what we can learn from Earth's past in order to take the best possible action and work with nature for our very survival.
So nature is clearly in your veins, and the mental health difficulties like anxiety, like depression, that are being experienced all around the world by people about the state of the environment. It's being called eco-anxiety, but you think it should be called eco-grief. Why is that?
I do think that the framing and the narrative and language that we use is really important. But in particular, because anxiety is understood as being a response of fear, and fear, quite like my therapist described it, as false eventualities appearing real. However, there is absolutely nothing that's not real about the reality of the climate, the climate crisis. We know we know what's coming our way. We know just how difficult that journey is going to be. And grief is a valid response to a real situation. So I do think it's really important that we really call this what it is. And grief, I think, as well, is much more of an understood, an understood kind of condition. And we even have that we understand the 7 stages of grief. So by framing it in the context of it being grief that is driven by the heartbreak of the reality of climate breakdown as eco-grief, we actually have much more tools to kind of help support us and manage it as well.
You wrote an article with BBC Scotland where you were interviewed about your own experiences. That article is still over on our website as well if people do want to have a read. But you received a tremendous response, didn't you?
Yeah, an overwhelming response, one which was both heartwarming and heartbreaking in equal measures. Just the sheer number of people who really resonated and felt heard, felt their feelings validated essentially by me sharing my story, which ultimately at the time when I was really struggling with eco grief, I didn't understand that it was exactly that. It was a lot of feelings, heartbreak that was paralyzing, And really ultimately I felt myself in a position where this was not a world that I wanted to be a part of. And that's a really scary place to be, especially when you don't understand those feelings. And so, yeah, it was really like brilliant to be able to share my story. And by sharing my story, like which so many people relate to in one way or another. Like, I hope that it really helps people to see that they are not alone, to understand and perhaps start to begin to be able to process those feelings with the truth of where they come from, and see that they are not alone, but in fact part of the majority. And once we feel part of a climate majority, it's only going to strengthen our collective action. But yeah, that response, both in the numbers, but also the complete range of different people who reached out and kind of thanked us for sharing the story. Like heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time, to actually realize that so many people have clearly been suffering in silence, have been struggling in a similar way to what I expressed. In silence, and without that kind of support and understanding perhaps of where it comes from, without people around them to be able to talk about it, and begin to process those feelings. And the thing that I would really highlight is that, you know, we talk so much about it affecting, you know, the climate emergency and just the general state of today's society, right? Like having such a negative impact on the mental health of the youth. But what really struck me was how many diverse people from different backgrounds, different ages, like the number of, like, without being too stereotypical, like middle class white males, like middle-aged males, who reached out, having felt some resonance to what I was sharing. Yeah, it really did surprise me, and definitely highlights a need for more of these conversations and support across the board, that this isn't actually just something that is you know, the youth. Like I had grandparents. I do hold an awful lot of hope, and can see a very positive future ahead of us. And a big part of that is this kind of the majority really awakening to itself. Like people who have been, you know, there's multiple polls have shown that the majority of the UK population are concerned about climate change, do feel that they have been consistently let down by leadership in this area. And yeah, seeing that realization and people, you know, holding these conversations and beginning to speak with each other, realize that we are the majority and that there is so much we can do together, and that by working together, you know, beyond, like going well beyond simply like recycling or green consumerism, like we're also very truthful, like beginning to be truthful with the reality, the kind of structures of society that have led us to this point and are actually barriers to the change that we so desperately need to see. Like the more of us that come together in those conversations that are truthful and hold each other not only in our action but also in our feelings, like creating those safe spaces for us to be together and realize our collective power. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jen Newall from the Climate Majority Project, for your thoughts there on the subject of climate anxiety.